Tonight on the Daily Debrief.
There can be no separate college admission system for the wealthy.
The feds say they've caught elite parents trying to cheat their children into elite colleges. Plus, the headless corpse of a former judge buried on a golf course. Was he murdered by his own son? Also, the moment when a farmer said goodbye to his wife.
He kissed her forehead, I think he even said.
Now, the son is charged with murder for money. The nation's top criminal cases are on the Daily Debrief. It's Tuesday, March 12th. And good evening, everybody. Welcome to the Debrief. We have an all-star panel put together tonight, so it'll be a great discussion. First, though, 33 influential parents are facing charges they collectively paid $25 million in bribes to secure their children a seat in elite colleges. Chief Investigative Correspondent Brian Ross is in the newsroom tonight with that report. Brian, good evening.
Well, good evening, Aaron. The schools involve Yale, Georgetown, Stanford, the University of Texas, Wake Forest, USC. Parents desperate to get their children into those schools, according to prosecutors, broke the law to get it done. Actresses Felicity Huffman and Lori Loughlin are among 33 wealthy parents charged by federal prosecutors with fraud in a massive bribery and cheating scandal to get their children accepted into elite colleges.
The parents charged today, despite already being able to give their children every legitimate advantage in the college admissions game, instead chose to corrupt and illegally manipulate the system for their benefit.
Among the schools where the students went, Yale, Georgetown, Stanford, USC. The conspiracy revolves around William Singer, who operated Edge College and Career Network in California. Prosecutors say parents paid Singer between $100,000 and $6 million to get their kids into top schools.
Most of this activity is fairly current, so I assume, I can't tell you directly, that the vast majority of the students admitted under false pretenses are in these schools and are enrolled and are active students.
According to the indictment, Singer would either pay test proctors or administrators to take the SAT or ACT tests on behalf of students or to correct their incorrect answers. According to the documents, Felicity Huffman paid $15,000 for her daughter's test scores to be corrected. Prosecutors also say college athletic coaches were bribed to falsely mark applicants as recruits, even though they sometimes had never even played the sport for which they were recruited.
In one example, the head women's soccer coach at Yale, in exchange for $400,000, accepted an applicant as a recruit for the Yale women's team, despite knowing that the applicant did not even play competitive soccer.
Lori Loughlin allegedly paid $500,000 to have her two daughters falsely recruited for the University of Southern California crew team. Singer reportedly pleaded guilty on Tuesday, and prosecutors say they expect the Stanford sailing coach John Vandermeer to do the same. The school says he has been fired. Singer is accused of channeling his bribes through a sham charity. He even is said to have advised parents to write off the fake charity payments as a tax deduction. Prosecutors say there is no evidence at this time that any colleges were aware of the fraud, at least not beyond the charged coaches and one administrator at the University of Southern California. But in some cases, the feds say the students were in on the scheme, while in other cases, the students were completely unaware. Aaron, they went to great lengths at some point. Some of the students were staging photos of them rowing or on bicycles to show that they were athletes when they really weren't. And all of this comes, Aaron, at the very time that parents and students are getting word this week and next about what colleges they will be admitted to. So this will ring very sour with lots of families across the country, Aaron.
Certainly so. Chief Investigative Correspondent Brian Ross, thanks for that report tonight. Day 2 of testimony in the case of a Florida man accused of murdering his father, a former judge, and dismembering that father's body before burying some of it on a golf course. Here is the case in chief. James Scandarito Jr. is charged with murder, but does not face the death penalty in the death of his father, James Sr. Prosecutors say a police dog found some of the father's remains buried at a golf course.
It is gruesome. It is despicable. In one of the garbage bags is the upper torso of a human being with the head cut off, decapitated.
The state says James killed his father after taking his money and using his debit card. Plus, the state says there's evidence of premeditation.
The defendant is eventually arrested in Alachua County on April 9th. And when he is, you'll hear that there are 2 different passports found with him. He has flight time itineraries. He has a contact number for a private jet company. The defendant is an individual who did everything he possibly could to get away with murder.
The defense says the former judge introduced his son to drugs and that the two were dealing drugs together.
Most of his business was in cash. The elder Scandarito was aware of this and sometimes would actually make trips to states like Washington and Colorado to assist with acquiring supply.
The defense argues that James Jr. chopped up his father's body after believing James Sr. died of a drug overdose. James Jr. feared that simply calling in the death would lead police to his stash of drugs.
Jimmy did something that he deeply regrets, and that is unfathomable to most individuals.
Testimony today from 2 friends who said the victim might or might not have been in ill health in the hours leading up to his death. Here is testimony from both.
What you told the police is that he got up first thing in the morning, presumably refreshed. You made a point of telling the police he hadn't been drinking or anything, right? And he suddenly became so ill that you got concerned.
No, he just was nauseated. We were having coffee, and he was nauseated. And
he might be having
well, it was time to leave to go to the golf match. I said, we're going to cancel the golf match today. All right, you sit down and take it easy. And I said, in my mind, all right, I thought, no, I don't know. He could be having a stroke. I mean, I don't. But nothing occurred. That was just out of my mind at the beginning. I was just being honest about it.
Okay.
You know what I mean? But as it was, it didn't concern me after that fact.
Well, you didn't see him after that fact, sir.
Yeah, I did. I saw him the rest of the day and the next morning, et cetera, and so forth. And yeah.
Right. Okay. So within 24 hours of this episode, you're gone and you don't see Mr. Scandarito again.
Right, but he was in very good health whenever I left, according to how I saw him.
Had you observed Mr. Scandirito performing normal physical activities?
Yes.
Can you tell the members of the jury what his normal physical activities were that you observed in the weeks leading up to when he disappeared?
He's very much into gardening. Very much into gardening. The lawn had just gone out because, like I said, Cherry did all the fixing and Jimbo had weeds, so he put the wrong stuff down, killed his lawn out in the front. So he was out on his hands and knees plucking every one of those weeds every day, right? Every day. I would go over and I'd be the supervisor.
All right, thank you. Thank you. Next question, please. It's okay. It's all right.
And on any of those occasions after that, did he ever see the ambulance come to his house?
Oh, no. It was always golf, racquetball, tennis.
Also today, a police officer testified that the defendant had no emotion and may have even tried to throw her off the trail right after the presumed date of the victim's death. Meanwhile, the victim's friends were also concerned.
What did the defendant tell you about where he thought his dad was?
At that point, he thought maybe he was kayaking with her.
And why did he think that they were out kayaking?
I don't know why he said kayaking, but he did say something that his kayak was broken, and so he would have taken her kayak to go out kayaking.
Was it your understanding from the defendant that Mr. Scandarito was going out on a date on Saturday, the day before you arrived on Easter Sunday?
Yeah, that's how I portrayed it, that he was with a woman and maybe he just missed their opportunity to watch the basketball game, March Madness, and then go golfing in the morning.
What was the defendant's demeanor during this conversation?
He had no emotion. He was like stoic, just kind of like just me sitting here, like talking to you just like this.
Okay. And what about Mr. Gooden? What was his demeanor like?
He seemed a little worried.
Overall. You can answer.
He seemed a little worried. I could tell just because he told me that it wasn't like him not to answer his phone. And he would never miss out on hanging out with his best friend who came across the alley and not give him a phone call and say, hey, I met this girlfriend, I'll be a little late or something. He said he would never miss a golf date for any woman.
Our guests tonight are criminal defense attorney Linda Kenny Bodden, criminal defense attorney David Katz, and former federal prosecutor Kendall Coffey. So let me throw this one out for discussion first. The state says this defendant was playing funny with money, had 2 passports. Is that premeditated murder, or is it a man dealing drugs? Kendall Coffey, your thoughts?
It could obviously strongly indicate a plan for murder, but the more the defense can develop this theme of drug dealing, father and son in it together, and hopefully from the defense standpoint, creating a reasonable doubt as to maybe the drugged out father died of all of his various health issues. Maybe they've got a shot. Most of us think this is very, very uphill for the defense.
Linda Kenny Bodden, same question for you.
I have mixed feelings here, Aaron. The reason why is I think this defendant watches TV. He's got his father kayaking with a woman, like the murder or homicide that was in New York a few years ago where the woman is out. He also has the cut-up head. Sounds like Robert Durst to me. I think that the money is the motive, and I think that the defendant is very well advised on the news.
Okay, David, we're hearing that this particular victim has drugs in his system, though. So is that enough for the defense to look and say the toxicology proves our theory?
Well, I think the toxicology may be forthcoming, but I think right now it's very hard to figure out exactly what the toxicology is. He's obviously made it much more difficult, the defendant has, to do proper testing of his deceased father by chopping up his body, by decapitating him, by burying him. And you have to ask yourself, if he loved his father at all, if he cared for him, if this really happened the way he says in his defense, how could he possibly have burned his father, chopped him in 2, chopped off his head, buried him in a golf course, and now dragged his name through the mud as a drug dealer? How could he have done that if he loved his father?
Well, you know, the defense turned around during openings and said, well, you know, father knew that if something like this happened, that son would have done it to protect the criminal enterprise. Kendall Coffey, are we to believe that?
Pretty far-fetched, pretty far-fetched. What the son's best case is that his father died shockingly. He reacted like some people would if they're drug crazed and if they're shocked, in a very strange succession of bizarre things. But it's definitely a very, very hard sell for the defense.
Linda Kenny Bodden, I know you're waiting for the forensics on this one. You want to know exactly what was in that victim's system.
Yes, I do. I want to know about the drugs in the system, although they may not be able to be quantified. And I also want to know about the heart disease. However, it may not be enough to help this defendant, given the nature of chopping the head off.
I mean, it seems like, look, I mean, there might be a nugget of truth behind this defense theory, but seriously, it looks a little bit more like premeditation to me. We'll have to wait and see, though. I will keep an open mind. We'll be back to the panel in a second. Still ahead tonight, here on the Daily Debrief, the trial of an Iowa man accused of murdering his mother because his farm was going to bust. Was the killing committed by another suspect? Was the crime scene staged? We're back inside a courtroom when we return. Welcome back, everyone. Day 3 of testimony in the case of an Iowa man accused of being a seed of evil. Prosecutors say he killed his mother because his own farm was failing and he needed money. Jason Carter has already been found civilly liable for the death of his mother, Shirley, but now he faces criminal charges. Authorities think he staged the scene to make it look like a robbery. A police officer today testified about a discussion he had with the defendant's father, the victim's husband. The defense says it proves Jason Carter could not have murdered his mother in the minutes leading up to his frantic 911 call.
Did Mr. Carter describe hugging Shirley?
He kissed her forehead, I think he even said.
And he said that she was cold and stiff?
Your Honor, same objection.
Overruled. I think it's admissible pursuant to Rule 803-2.
I believe that was an accurate statement at that time.
In fact, he said that she was in rigor mortis.
I do believe he did say that.
He said he knew that because he'd been a butcher, and he knows when something's been dead a long time.
I believe that was true.
And he repeated again that she was cold and stiff.
That same witness said the first person to note a missing gun from the father's gun safe was the defendant. The defense questioned the number of tips authorities received, which linked other suspects to the killing.
Has the Marion County Sheriff's Department received, indicating that Joe Sedlock, Joel Followell, or John Followell were involved in the murder of Shirley Carter?
I do not know the number, but there's been a lot. I don't know a number off the top of my head. It's something I can find, but I can't tell you right now a number.
More than 20?
On different calls or different things? Could be.
Maybe more than 30?
Ma'am, I can't tell you. I mean, the more than 20, I mean, I was even a guess on my part. I don't know for sure on how many there has been. Detective Caius, my detective, would have a lot better idea of those numbers than I would, because he's the one that's assigned to follow up on those.
And those calls date back to shortly after the murder?
What's your definition of shortly? I remember in the fall, I think, is when we started receiving those calls.
One of the defendant's friends testified about the crime scene. If he sounds like a police officer, it's because he used to be a first responder.
I observed what looked like a chunk out of the floor. Would have been to the left of the victim as she lied on the floor. Also a hole in the refrigerator behind the victim, orientated direction would be from the northeast of the victim. I then was curious about the comments that Jason made about the house being ransacked. Standing in the kitchen, I looked into the room, which would be to the east of the kitchen. What I observed in there was a desk with some papers knocked off the desk. It looked like somebody had went in there and just took their hands and took some papers off the desk and put them on the floor. Went through a drawer, as I recall. I also observed what looked like to be a checkbook lying on the floor.
Earlier testimony in this case came from a woman with whom defendant Jason Carter was having an affair. The state tried to claim a gap in her text messages with the defendant gave Jason Carter time to commit murder. Here is some of the cross-examination.
It wasn't unusual, though, to have gaps in your conversations.
No.
And was there anything unusual about the substance of your conversation on June 19th?
No.
Did you perceive in any way that Jason Carter was troubled on the morning of June 19th?
No.
Now, you said that you shared personal information. Did Jason Carter always speak positively about his mother?
Yes.
From what you could see, appeared to love his mother?
Yes.
Did you ever have any sense that he was angry or mad at his mother?
No.
In fact, would you say he was close to his parents?
Yes.
I think at one point you said the worst thing he ever said about his mother is he couldn't eat grilled cheese anymore because she made a lot of that when he grew up.
Yes.
Back to Linda Kenny Bodden, David Katz, and Kendall Coffey on this one. So, David, let me throw this question your way. How should we process these tips naming other suspects?
I think you want to, Kendall? Well, I think this is a case that would be much easier to defend. Certainly, if you were a criminal defense attorney, this alleged matricide seems to have a lot of defenses. Among other things, he left his father alive. And the fact that people called up and made tips, unless people always have tips in this kinds of situation. It seems that they didn't have very good grounds at all, really, to think that this person is the murderer, except he supposedly knew too much about the rifle and what had happened to the rifle. This really seems to me like a very problematic case where this fellow really may not be guilty at all.
Linda, the defense says the state's timeline is way off on this one due to the husband's belief that his wife had rigor mortis, and the husband basically tried to qualify himself as an expert and said, I was a butcher, I know how to recognize it. This isn't just me positing that something is up. This is someone who says, I am used to dealing with dead things.
Yeah, I know, but you know, the proper medical examination, we have another guest on the show, always on, Joseph Scott Morgan, would tell you that you have to take the temperature of the room, you have to take the temperature of the body, you've got to do it right, and you have to feel, and you have to have someone who knows what they're talking about, because even first responders get the rigor mortis wrong. So I'm with the defense on this part, this aspect.
You're with the defense.
Yes, on that aspect. On that aspect, I'm with the defense.
Okay, so you're saying that he's more of an expert than I thought you were trying to say he was.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're buying this. In other words, that if there's rigor mortis, then it could not have been a crime committed by this particular defendant on this particular morning.
At that time.
Let me throw it this way. Kendall Coffey, the timeline here is key. The state is saying the defendant was lying about doing certain farm work, and he was lying about it. It didn't really get done. Other farmers would look and turn around and say, wait a minute, that wasn't done, and I could tell that it wasn't done. They know, and the state says that it wasn't done because this defendant was committing murder.
Well, I mean, it's certainly something the prosecution can argue, but I think the jurors may find a reasonable doubt if lying is the worst thing that they see. We saw that the jurors may have a lead on an alternative hypothesis of the killing. That is to say, all these tips flooding into the police department. And the friend, I guess the person that the defendant had a relationship, she's a pretty good witness for the defense. I thought even though she was obviously uncomfortable testifying, I thought she helped the defense a fair bit in indicating he loved his mother. And yeah, he wasn't crazy about all the grilled cheese.
And we keep hearing from everyone, according to the defense, everybody's going to get up there and testify. The only problem he had was the grilled cheese. This was a tight-knit family. And what of the staged robbery scene? Was it staged, or was it just a robbery that wasn't completed? Great panel tonight. Thank you all for joining me on The Debrief. And thanks for those of you watching along with me. I'll be back tomorrow at 5 o'clock here on the Law&Crime Network with this nightly recap of the best moments of testimony in cases nationwide. Our live trial coverage picks up at 9 o'clock in the morning. Have a good night from all of us here at Law&Crime.